Winter in the Middle Ages never arrived suddenly. It crept into the villages slowly, like a silent shadow stretching across the land. People felt it first in the air, in the way breath turned faintly white in the mornings. Even the smoke from the chimneys bent low, as if the cold was pushing it down. Before any snowfall, villagers already sensed that a difficult season was approaching. Winter was not just a time of frost, it was a quiet test of endurance. Homes were sealed early, shutters packed with straw to block the icy wind. Families huddled together in dim rooms, warmed only by a small hearth fire. But the warm air inside those houses became heavy, filled with moisture and smoke. And in that stillness, winter illnesses quietly began to settle. A simple tiredness often appeared first. It felt like the body moving through unseen weight. People blamed it on the long nights and the absence of sunlight. No one suspected it was the first step toward deeper sickness. A soft cough usually followed, almost harmless in the beginning. Villagers brushed it off, calling it the winter tickle. But as the cold thickened, that gentle cough became rough and persistent. It echoed through wooden walls during the silent nights. Medieval people believed the cold itself entered the lungs. They imagined winter spirits freezing the breath inside the chest. To fight this, they heated stones in the fire and wrapped them in wool. They placed the warm stones against the chest, praying the cold would leave. Sometimes it worked for a while, bringing short comfort. But the deeper illnesses of winter did not release their grip so easily. Outside, the wind grew sharp and restless. It circled around houses like something alive. Trees stood stiff and leafless, scratching the sky with thin branches. Rivers froze, paths hardened, and the world fell into deep stillness. In this frozen silence, the illnesses took stronger shape. One of the most feared was known as the white breath. It began with a strange pale color spreading across the lips. Soon the fingers turned numb, as if life was slowly retreating. Breathing became shallow, each inhale thin and faint. Villagers believed the cold was stealing the soul through the breath. Families wrapped the sick in layers of wool and fur. They placed heated bricks at their feet, hoping warmth would return. But the white breath was stubborn, especially with the constant chill. Nights were long, and fires often burned too low to fight the cold fully. Another winter illness spread quietly among children first. It made their skin pale and their bodies heavy with weakness. Mothers held them close to the hearth for warmth, but the smoky air often irritated their lungs even more. The mixture of cold outside and smoke inside created a dangerous trap. Breathing became difficult for many, yet no one understood why. Herbal healers tried offering thyme and rosemary steam. They believed warm vapors could cleanse the chest. Some relief came, but only for a short while. As soon as night returned, the harsh cold followed with it. Villagers noticed that winter illnesses often worsened after sunset. They described the night air as alive with frost. Many refused to step outside after dark, fearing an unseen chill. They believed winter demons wandered the land seeking weakened bodies. The elderly suffered the most. Their joints stiffened, their breath shortened, and sleep came heavily. Some mornings, they struggled to rise from their cold straw beds. Their families whispered prayers beside the fire, hoping strength would return. There was also a sickness called the slow fading. It wasn't sudden, but it trained a person day by day. Food tasted dull, and the body felt colder than the world outside. Even thick blankets couldn't bring warmth back into the bones. People believed this fading came from a winter spirit touching the heart. Others thought it was punishment for not storing enough food before the freeze. In truth, it was likely a mix of malnutrition and cold-weakened immunity. But medieval villagers had no way of knowing such things. The silence of winter made these illnesses feel even heavier. Sound traveled slowly, and nights stretched endlessly. Coughs echoed across the village with no other noise to hide them. It felt as though the whole world was breathing unsteadily. Midwives and herbal women moved from house to house, carrying pouches of dried plants. Their footsteps were soft on the snow, leaving narrow trails behind. They brought teas of mint, elderflower, and warm honey. These simple remedies became the only comfort many families had. But much of medieval healing relied on warmth. Warm stones, warm blankets, warm drinks, everything depended on fire. And firewood was precious. A poor family used every piece carefully, afraid of running out before spring. When fire burned low, the cold crept inside like a living thing. Children shivered even beneath thick wool, and elders struggled to breathe. Many households kept animals inside during the coldest nights. The body heat helped, though the air grew thicker and harder to breathe. Illness spread more quickly in these crowded rooms. A single cough could travel through an entire family by morning. Still, people believed togetherness protected them from the cold. No one wanted to sleep alone in winter darkness. The forgotten diseases often blended with exhaustion. People grew tired not just in their bodies, but in their spirits. It felt as though winter pressed down on their chest and mind. Breathing, thinking, even speaking required more effort. These winter illnesses rarely had cures. They came with the cold and left only when spring returned. But despite the fear, medieval villagers learned to endure the suffering quietly. They listened to the wind, tended the fire, and waited for warmth to return. In every family, someone kept the night watch on the fire. They added wood slowly, carefully, to keep the flame alive till dawn. Because they believed fire was more than heat, it was life. As long as the flame burned, winter diseases could be held back a little longer. And so, night after night, winter illness and human endurance lived side by side. Survival became a slow rhythm of coughing, healing, breathing, and waiting. The cold tried to weaken them, but the people, in their quiet resilience, refused to surrender easily. This was the beginning of the forgotten winter illnesses, silent, creeping, and woven deeply into the season itself. As winter deepened in the Middle Ages, an uneasy quietness settled across the villages. Even the smallest sounds seemed softer, as if the world itself was conserving energy. People woke before the sun, though it hardly mattered, because daylight came so slowly. The sky remained pale and colorless for hours, giving mornings a dreamlike stillness. In this muted world, the winter diseases continued to grow stronger. They moved through homes in ways no one could see or understand. The villagers believed the cold carried invisible spirits that drifted between houses. Some said these spirits followed the wind, slipping through cracks in doors and shutters. Others thought illnesses fell from the sky with the frost, landing on rooftops like quiet snow. By the time families stepped outside, the sickness had already touched their breath. One illness, known later as the night sweats, troubled many during the coldest months. Despite the freezing air, people would wake drenched in warmth, trembling with weakness. They didn't understand why warmth felt like sickness, but the fever came from infections born in damp rooms and smoky air. People feared these sudden fevers more than any cough. They believed the heat was a sign of the body fighting winter spirits in the dark. To comfort the sick, families placed cool cloths on their foreheads. But the cloths chilled too quickly, turning the simple remedy into another discomfort. Wood was scarce, so fires remained small and cautious. Families gathered close to the flame, but shadows always pressed in from every side. Those shadows felt alive during winter, moving gently around the edges of the room. Children whispered that the shadows were sick spirits watching them sleep. Parents told them it was only the fire flickering. But even adults felt an uneasy presence in the stillness of winter nights. Another illness took root in the throat. First came a scratchy dryness, then a sharp pain each time a person swallowed. The villagers called it winter throat. It made eating difficult, drinking painful, and speaking heavy. Many blamed the cold air that rushed in when doors opened at dawn. That first breath of icy wind felt like it sliced straight through the throat. Some tried to soothe it with warm broth, slowly sipping from wooden cups. Others wrapped scarves around their necks even indoors, hoping to trap any bit of warmth. But winter throat often lingered for weeks. People whispered prayers to keep it from turning into something worse. The worst transformations were known as the deep chills. This was when a simple sore throat spread downward into the chest. Breathing became shallow, sounding like whispers trapped inside the ribs. Every inhale felt cold, every exhale too weak to stay warm. It frightened families, especially at night when the house grew colder. They watched over their loved ones, listening carefully to the rhythm of their breath. When breathing slowed, panic crept in like a hidden intruder. They would shake the sick gently, hoping to wake the lungs again. In those days, death often arrived silently in winter. People slipped away in sleep, lost between exhaustion and cold. Villagers believed the winter spirit visited homes in the darkest hours. They said it placed a hand on the chest of the weak, taking their final breath. To keep the spirit away, families burned a small piece of fragrant wood beside the hearth. The smell filled the house softly, a quiet plea for protection. Another forgotten winter disease struck the skin. It began with tiny red patches, barely noticeable at first. But with time, the patches darkened, turning purple and painful. People called this winter blight. The cold tightened around the skin like an invisible band. Blood struggled to reach fingers, toes, and ears. Farmers working outside felt the first signs while handling icy tools. Their hands numbed so deeply, they couldn't tell if they were bleeding. Children were especially vulnerable. Their thin wool gloves barely protected them from the biting cold. Parents rubbed warm oil on their skin each night. The oil softened the dryness, but couldn't stop the deep freezing. Some believed winter blight was caused by offended forest spirits. They thought the trees punished humans for cutting wood too freely. Others believed it came from touching snow too much. They warned children never to press bare skin against frost. But the truth was simpler. The body was fighting a losing battle against the cold. Frozen skin became weak, and weakness welcomed sickness. Inside the homes, another illness thrived quietly. It was known as the sleeping illness. People would feel a growing heaviness behind their eyes. This illness was feared because it felt like fading. The body grew too still, too quiet, too distant. Villagers believed the cold was pulling people into eternal sleep. They prayed the sleeping ones would wake again with the morning light. The cause was malnutrition and weakened blood. But medieval people had no words for such things. They only knew that winter robbed the body of strength. And rest, though comforting, also pulled people deeper into weakness. Midwives tried feeding warm honey water to the sleeping. They dripped it into their mouths little by little. Sometimes it worked. Other times, the illness stayed strong. In the evenings, the houses grew darker. The single flame of a candle created long shadows along the walls. Families whispered softly so they wouldn't disturb the sick. Their voices sounded like gentle wind moving through leaves. Children watched in silence, their small faces half lit by the fire. They felt the weight of winter illness, even if they didn't understand it. Outside, wolves howled from distant forests. Their cries carried through the frozen air like old songs of hunger. The villagers believed the wolves sensed sickness. They said the animals came closer, during times of human weakness. Nights became a strange mix of fear and routine. Families checked the fire, checked the sick, checked the doors, and still, winter illnesses moved quietly through the village. Each home faced its own battles. Each family whispered its own prayers. One illness, almost forgotten today, was the hollow breath. People suddenly felt like their lungs were empty. They inhaled, but it felt like nothing entered. They exhaled, but it felt like they had nothing to give. This illness caused panic quickly. Even strong men felt fear tightening in their throats. The breathlessness came from cold-damaged airways and weak hearts. But medieval people believed it was a spirit sitting on the chest. To chase the spirit away, they burned herbs like juniper and sage. The smoke filled the room with a warm, earthy smell. The ritual gave comfort, if not cure. It made people feel they weren't helpless anymore. But winter diseases thrived on fear and exhaustion. The weaker people felt, the stronger the illnesses seemed. Despite everything, hope lived quietly in these homes. Even in the darkest nights, someone always kept the fire alive. The glow of the hearth became a symbol of survival. Its warmth fought back the cold inch by inch. Families shared stories to ease fear. They spoke of past winters, past recoveries, past miracles. They reminded each other that winter never lasts forever, that spring always finds a way to break through the frost, and so the people endured. They warmed their hands, protected their loved ones, and trusted the flame. For every cough that echoed, there was a hand offering comfort. For every fevered night, there was a prayer whispered into the shadows. Winter diseases were harsh, but the human spirit remained softer, yet stronger. In the stillness of cold nights, resilience became its own quiet medicine. The illnesses would continue their silent journey through the season, but so would the people, one slow breath at a time. In this way, the forgotten winter diseases shaped entire generations. They taught endurance, patience, and the gentle art of surviving the cold. Winter kept deepening until the world outside looked like an endless sheet of pale silence. Even the trees seemed frozen in a moment of breathless stillness. The villagers began moving slower, their bodies adjusting to the heavy cold. Every task required more effort, as though the air resisted their movements. The illnesses of winter continued to evolve quietly in the shadows. They did not rush, they unfolded slowly, layer by layer. One sickness appeared first in the fingertips. A mild numbness, barely noticeable at the start. People would rub their hands together, thinking it was just the ordinary cold. But the numbness sometimes deepened into a frightening stillness. This condition became known as frozen touch. It made the hands feel as if they no longer belonged to the body. The cold seeped in through thin gloves and worn sleeves. It settled into bones, turning movement stiff and painful. Farmers trying to carry water from the well often dropped their buckets. Their fingers simply couldn't close tightly enough. Women weaving near the fire felt their threads slip away. The body's warmth wasn't enough to reach the fingertips. Children cried when their hands turned pale and rigid. Mothers warmed them by placing their small hands between their own. But warmth was difficult to maintain in homes filled with cold drafts. Even the strongest fires seemed too small for the long nights. Medicinal oils were rubbed into fingers to bring back sensation. Outside, the air felt much sharper. It pressed against faces like tiny needles of ice. Villagers wrapped their scarves tightly, but the cold still found a way inside. It traveled down the neck, into the chest, settling deep in the body. It made the limbs ache as though they carried invisible weight. Movement became slow, stiff, and heavy. The elderly especially suffered, their joints swelling painfully. They slept near the hearth, hoping warmth would ease the ache. Sometimes the pain was so deep it kept them awake all night. They whispered soft prayers into the darkness, hoping for relief. Warm compresses were placed on stubborn joints, but water heated over a small fire stayed warm only for moments. The bone ache grew worse on nights when snow fell silently outside. The cold seemed to slip through walls and settle into the very structure of homes. Families huddled together under heavy blankets. The shared warmth offered small comfort against the bitter cold. Another creeping illness affected the eyes. People woke with a strange burning sensation, as if smoke had seeped into their vision. The villagers called it winter eyes. It turned their sight blurry, making the world look dimmer. Those who spent long hours by the fire faced the worst of it. The smoke curled slowly upward, stinging the eyes without mercy. Children rubbed their eyes with small fists. Their lashes clumped together with frost when they stepped outside. Healers made warm eye washes with chamomile and lavender. The gentle herbs soothed the burning for a little while, but the illness never fully disappeared until spring. The cold air and dark days weakened the eyes over time. Travelers returning from long journeys often brought tales of winter sickness. They said even the roads seemed sick during the cold months. Footpaths disappeared beneath layers of ice. The world became unfamiliar, reshaped by snow and silence. People walking from one village to another moved in careful steps. Each footfall produced a faint crunch that echoed strangely in the quiet. Another illness began to trouble those who traveled long distances. It caused sudden dizziness, like the ground beneath them was shifting. Villagers named it cold sway. It made people feel as if they were floating through the world. The dizziness came from hunger, exhaustion, and freezing winds. But medieval people believed it came from winter spirits twisting the air. Travelers carried small charms around their necks for protection, often just a piece of carved wood or a tiny metal symbol. These charms were believed to keep the winter spirits away. Even if they didn't cure sickness, they offered comfort and courage. Inside the villages, another strange weakness spread through households. People felt as if their bodies had become lighter and heavier at the same time. This condition was described as the winter wasting. It slowly drained strength, leaving people fragile. Simple tasks like lifting a bucket or sweeping the floor became exhausting. People paused often, catching their breath, leaning on walls for support. Food supplies ran low as winter stretched on. Most families lived on dried grains, root vegetables, and thin broths. The lack of fresh food weakened the body's defenses. Illness found its way into every home that struggled with hunger. Parents often gave their portion of food to their children. Their quiet sacrifice went unnoticed, but their bodies felt the price. The children grew tired too, but the parents faded faster. Their faces grew pale, their eyes dim, their hands cold. Some tried gathering herbs hidden beneath patches of winter grass, but most of the land lay dormant, offering little to survive on. In this deep hunger, a strange sickness appeared in the mind. People felt forgetful, confused, and lost in their own thoughts. They described it as winter fog. It made memories slip away like snow melting in water. The fog drifted into conversations. People paused mid-sentence, searching for words they once knew. Families grew concerned as elders repeated the same questions. Children watched with worry as their grandparents struggled to recall names. The fog made the world feel slower, quieter, and distant. Even familiar paths looked unfamiliar through tired eyes. Villagers believed the cold stole pieces of the mind. They said winter nights whispered secrets that confused the brain. To protect themselves, they kept lanterns burning near sleeping areas. The soft glow was meant to guard against confusing dreams. Another illness formed in homes with poor ventilation. It caused deep coughing that rattled through the chest. The villagers referred to it simply as smoke sickness. It came from spending long hours in rooms filled with thick fire smoke. Fires were necessary for survival, yet they carried hidden danger. The smoke rose slowly, filling the air with invisible heaviness. The sick coughed through the night, keeping the household awake. Each cough sounded like a struggle between breath and cold. Mothers held their children upright to help them breathe easier. The room filled with soft murmurs and gentle pats on small backs. Healers recommended opening a window just a little, but the cold rushed inside too quickly, threatening everyone's warmth. Families chose between the danger of smoke and the danger of frost. Neither choice felt safe, but survival depended on balance. The coughing became worse when winter storms approached. The air inside changed, becoming denser and harder to breathe. On storm nights, villagers stayed awake, tending the fire carefully. The walls creaked, and the wind howled like a restless animal. People whispered that the wind carried sickness from house to house. They imagined it slipping under doors and creeping into beds. One particularly frightening illness appeared suddenly. People felt a sharp pain beneath their ribs when breathing deeply. This sickness was called ice breath. It made the chest feel cold from the inside out. Every inhale felt like swallowing winter itself. People wrapped blankets tightly around their shoulders, trembling. Elders said the illness came from standing outside during the first frost. They believed early winter held the strongest magic of the cold. Young villagers were warned not to chase the first snow, but children always ran toward falling snowflakes with excitement. They learned too late that joy in winter came with risk. Some fell sick after long play, their breath icy and shallow. Families tended to them with warm teas and gentle care. But recovery from ice breath was slow and unpredictable. Still, hope lived quietly in every home. No matter how harsh the winter sickness became, the people endured. They supported one another with shared meals and shared warmth. Neighbors brought small gifts of broth, bread, or herbs. These gestures softened the long season of illness. They reminded everyone that winter didn't have to be faced alone. The rhythm of life continued despite hardship. Fires crackled softly, blankets rustled, and snow fell quietly outside. People learned to listen to their bodies with patience. They rested when weak, warmed their hands when numb, and breathed slowly. The world outside remained frozen and still, but inside the homes, gentle conversations carried warmth from one person to another. Even in sickness, there was a sense of gentle togetherness. The cold tested them, but unity protected them. And so winter illnesses continued to weave themselves through daily life, softly, quietly, like threads stitching a story into the season. No one knew exactly when the illnesses would fade, but everyone believed spring would eventually return with new life. Until then, they survived through warmth, care, and quiet strength. Breath by breath, night by night, they waited for the world to thaw. The winter of the Middle Ages was not just a season, but a slow, heavy breath that settled across villages and valleys. It arrived softly, yet stayed with a weight no one could ignore. In this deep cold, people often looked silently toward the heavens, hoping for strength, hoping for warmth, hoping for healing that did not always come quickly. And in the middle of this frozen world, there existed a small group of individuals whose presence felt gentle, almost sacred. They were the silent healers, herbalists, midwives, apothecaries, traveling monks, wandering through snow-softened paths with bags full of dried herbs, smoke-scented cloth, and whispered remedies passed down through generations. Their knowledge was not written in books. Their cures lived in memory, carried by stories told beside dim firesides, taught through touch, smell, and instinct. And in a winter filled with hidden diseases, these quiet healers became the fragile bridge between sickness and survival. Villagers relied on them when cold nights grew longer, when bodies weakened, when breaths became heavy clouds dissolving into the icy air. People believed their hands held something ancient, something almost mystical, as if the wisdom itself had been carved out of the winter earth. They often traveled alone, listening as they walked, listening to the way trees moved, to the way wind hissed, to the way snow broke under their steps. For them, nature was a guide, a teacher, and a companion. Every healing secret was connected to a plant, a root, a leaf that managed to survive the harshest months. Wild thyme clinging to frozen soil, dried elderberries strung like beads above a cottage hearth, bitter willow bark steeped in steaming clay pots. Each had a purpose. Each had a story that stretched far beyond the winter of any single year. People did not call these healers doctors. They called them by softer names: the herb woman, the bone mender, the winter monk, the wise mother. And when they visited a house where sickness lingered, they entered with quiet steps, as if not to disturb the spirit of illness itself. They brought warmth with them, not through fire, but through calmness, presence, and a strange sense of reassurance. Most winter illnesses were slow, creeping, and indescribable. A chill in the chest, a shiver that never stopped, a weakness that made holding a cup feel like lifting a stone. Often, these symptoms were early signs of diseases that had no names, only fears. And so the healers learned to soothe, even when they could not cure. They brewed potions made from herbs gathered in spring and preserved for the cold months. They mixed honey with crushed roots, believing sweetness carried strength. They warmed stones in the fire and placed them beneath blankets to keep the sick from slipping into the dangerous numbness of frost. They whispered prayers that belonged to no book, prayers shaped from hope and habit. Sometimes they stayed through the night, sitting beside a sick child, listening to breaths that trembled between life and silence. Sometimes they simply left a bundle of herbs on the doorstep and walked away before dawn. They never asked for thanks. They rarely stayed long enough to hear it. In the coldest years, when diseases multiplied like shadows spreading across the land, their journeys became longer and their steps slower. They often carried exhaustion deeper than any patient they treated, yet they kept moving, guided by an inner sense of duty born from compassion rather than profession. They knew that winter cared for no one. It swallowed the weak quickly, and so they tried to stand between people and that merciless cold, even if only for a moment. Many healers believed that every winter sickness had a root, physical, spiritual, or emotional. They would often study faces closely, searching for signs of fatigue, sorrow, or fear. A furrowed brow, a trembling lip, eyes clouded with sleeplessness. To them, curing was not just about herbs or warmth. It was about bringing a person back to themselves, helping them remember the strength hidden beneath their suffering. Some illnesses truly were mysteries. A fever rising without explanation, a cough echoing through midnight while the rest of the world slept, or a dream-like confusion that settled upon the mind like drifting snow. For these, the healers used remedies drawn from old beliefs: burning juniper branches to cleanse the air, boiling garlic in broth to awaken the body, chanting slow incantations believed to chase away unseen forces. They understood that hope often healed faster than medicine, and so they offered hope in every gentle movement. A warm hand placed on a cold forehead, a cup of steaming brew steadied between trembling fingers, a quiet word of reassurance spoken like a lullaby. The winter sicknesses of those times were not solely physical. Loneliness crept into homes like an invisible frost. Isolation weighed on hearts searching for comfort. Fear spread quicker than disease itself. And so the silent healers knew that a soft voice or a patient ear was sometimes the most powerful cure they could give. They sat with widows who had lost husbands to the cold. They comforted children who woke from night terrors born from fever dreams. They guided exhausted mothers who feared their families would not survive another harsh season. In every village, their arrival was almost sacred. People opened doors that had remained shut for days. Fires were stoked brighter, faces softened with relief. Not because miracles were guaranteed, but because their presence meant the battle against winter was not being fought alone. By candlelight, they sorted herbs into tiny piles. They crushed dried petals into soft dust between their palms. They boiled mixtures that filled rooms with warm, earthy scents. Sometimes, after hours of tending, a sick person would suddenly breathe easier. Their cheeks would regain a faint blush. Their hands would stop trembling. Their eyes would flutter open with clarity. In those moments, healer and patient alike felt the fragile magic of survival. A small victory in a season that rarely offered kindness. Yet despite their wisdom, not every life could be saved. Some illnesses grew too strong. Some winters grew too long. And some bodies simply could not endure the endless cold. But even then, healers did not turn away. They stayed beside the dying, offering comfort when cure was no longer possible. They whispered gentle words, smoothing the sharp edges of fear. They made sure no one crossed that final threshold alone. After leaving each house, whether in hope or sorrow, they stepped back into the winter night where snow fell soundlessly. The wind carried the faint scent of herbs clinging to their cloaks. Their lantern light swayed softly as they walked. Their breath rose in small white clouds toward the moonlit sky. And though their work was unseen, unrecorded, and uncelebrated, it shaped countless lives. Their quiet dedication stood like a thin shield protecting communities from the harshest edges of winter. Even centuries later, stories of these healers live in the memory of old villages. They remain symbols of compassion stronger than cold, symbols of courage that flowered in the depth of winter, symbols of humanity in a world where survival was never guaranteed. The forgotten winter diseases of the Middle Ages were many, but so were the hands that tried to heal them. Hands that moved gently. Hands that offered warmth when the world felt unbearably cold. Hands that turned long, dark winters into seasons where hope survived, even in the faintest, most delicate form. Snow fell like powdered silence across the medieval world, spreading a white stillness that covered rooftops, forests, and fields. And beneath that quiet beauty, winter carried illnesses that slipped into villages like unseen shadows. These diseases did not always strike loudly. They crept softly, slowly, settling into bodies weakened by cold and hunger. People gave them names that came from fear rather than knowledge. The night weakener, the chest tightness, the pale wasting, the long cold. Yet many winter plagues remained nameless, drifting through the Middle Ages with a strange, almost ghost-like presence. They appeared when the frosts were deepest, when nights stretched endlessly, and when breath hung in the air like fragile smoke. In those months, every cough felt heavier, every shiver felt deeper, every whisper of illness felt like a warning carried on the winter wind. The first sign often came as a simple chill that clung stubbornly to the limbs. People wrapped themselves in furs, yet still felt cold spreading inward, as if the frost had learned to touch the bones. This cold was not ordinary. It drained strength without pain, leaving villagers weak, slow, and breathless with the smallest effort. Some described it as a feeling of sinking, as if the body were becoming part of the winter itself. No one understood its cause. They only knew it grew stronger after each snowfall, and those who felt it often withdrew into silence, conserving every bit of warmth they had left. Another plague arrived quietly through the lungs. A short breath here, a faint rattle there, nothing alarming at first. But as days passed, breathing became a struggle, each inhale feeling thick, each exhale sounding strained. People sat close to fire pits, leaning forward, clutching blankets as their chests tightened like cloth, being pulled too hard. This winter sickness was feared for its unpredictability. Some recovered after days of rest, Others spiraled downward without warning, and no one knew why the frost favored one life over another. In dim cottages lit by candles, families watched over their loved ones through long nights. They listened to breaths that stuttered. They counted heartbeats that faltered. They prayed for dawn in whispers that trembled with fear. But even dawn offered no guarantees. Cold daylight sometimes only deepened the illness. And when the snow outside thickened, it felt as though the world itself was holding its breath. Across villages, another mysterious plague was known simply as the winter fever. It came with no wounds, no visible source, only a burning heat that felt strange inside the coldest season. A person could shiver violently, yet burn with fever beneath layered blankets. Their faces flushed red, their lips dried and cracked. Their eyes glistened with confusion, as if they were drifting between waking and dream. Families cooled their skin with snow-soaked cloths. They whispered soothing words. They tried to keep the mind anchored to reality. But the fever had a strange rhythm of its own. It rose and fell like waves across frozen shores. Sometimes it vanished overnight. Sometimes it lingered for weeks, weakening the body until even sitting upright became difficult. This winter fever was feared because of the hallucinations it brought. People spoke to shadows on the walls. They cried out for loved ones long gone. They reached toward empty spaces, seeing shapes no one else could see. For those watching, it felt as though winter was playing tricks on the mind. Families held trembling hands. They wiped foreheads glistening with sweat. They prayed quietly for the fever to break before the spirit drifted too far. There was yet another silent plague, whispered in fear across valleys and forests. It began in the fingertips. A tingling, a numbness, a strange, unfamiliar cold. People rubbed their hands vigorously, tried warming them by the fire, tried wrapping them in wool, but the cold only spread further. First to the hands, then the feet, then slowly, frighteningly, toward the heart. This illness did not kill quickly, but day by day, it stole warmth from the body until the skin turned pale, then bluish, then frighteningly still. Healers believed it was caused by spirits of winter who fed upon warmth, leaving the body slowly frozen from within. And though the explanation came from fear and imagination, the symptoms were real. People moved slower. Their limbs stiffened. Their hearts weakened. Their world dimmed into the quiet hush of cold. In some homes, this illness struck multiple members of a family. Parents watched their children shiver under blankets. Children watched their parents struggle to rise. And the entire household seemed caught in a slow battle against a cold they could not escape. The forgotten plagues of medieval winters also included a strange sickness of the blood. It drained color from the skin. It hollowed cheeks. It made walking feel like carrying a heavy burden. Villagers believed it was caused by winter hunger of the blood, a poetic name for something they could not understand. But the real cause was likely malnutrition mixed with harsh cold, a combination that weakened the body from the inside. People suffering from it often moved like shadows, quiet, unsteady, breathing softly as if afraid to disturb the silence of the season. For them, the world felt heavier. Food lost its taste. Sleep brought no rest. And their bodies slowly thinned until even simple tasks felt impossible. Some winter illnesses did not come alone. They layered themselves upon one another. A fever mixed with a cough. A chill mixed with confusion. Weakness mixed with numbness. And the body, already strained by bitter cold, struggled to fight them all at once. In the Middle Ages, people believed winter had its own personality, neither cruel nor kind, simply indifferent. It brought illness, but it also brought stillness. It brought hardship, but it also brought quiet beauty. And trapped within this paradox, people tried to survive as best they could. Villagers shared what little they had. Warm soups made from root vegetables, blankets stitched from old cloth, candles lit through the night to offer light against fear. Families huddled together for warmth, sharing breath, sharing whispers, sharing hope. Their unity became a quiet form of medicine that no healer could brew. And though no one could name many of these winter plagues, everyone experienced them. Everyone knew their touch. Everyone respected their presence like uninvited guests who always arrived with the first frost. Healers, wise women, and monks worked tirelessly during these months. They mixed herbs into steaming brews. They warmed stones for placing under blankets. They prayed for strength and clarity. They stayed awake through countless nights, guided by candlelight and instinct. Sometimes they succeeded, lifting a person out of sickness into strength once more. Sometimes they only eased the suffering without changing the outcome. But in both cases, their presence brought comfort. Their knowledge, though limited, brought hope. Their calmness brought peace when the world felt fragile. Outside, winter continued its silent reign. Wolves howled in distant forests. Snowdrifts grew tall against stone walls. Icicles formed like glass spears beneath cottage roofs. And through this frozen landscape, the unseen plagues drifted quietly, touching lives without ever revealing their true origins. But despite their mystery, despite their fear, despite the sorrow they brought, people endured. They adapted. They learned to read the earliest signs of sickness. They learned to conserve warmth and share supplies. They learned to trust one another. And most importantly, they learned to hope, even in the deepest cold. By midwinter, everyone knew someone who had suffered one of these illnesses. A neighbor, a relative, a traveler who never reached his destination. Each story left a mark on the village, shaping the way people prepared for future winters. Wisdom was passed quietly from parent to child, from healer to apprentice, from elder to youth. This unspoken knowledge became a shield, thin, imperfect, but precious. People remembered which herbs brought warmth to the chest. They remembered which teas soothed fevered minds. They remembered which foods strengthened the weak. And they remembered the importance of kindness, for illness felt lighter when compassion filled the room. In time, many of these winter plagues faded from memory. New diseases appeared. Old ones changed. And the world slowly moved forward. But the nameless winter illnesses of the Middle Ages left behind an invisible legacy, a soft reminder of human fragility, human strength, and the quiet endurance that carried people through the coldest seasons. Their stories live on not through books or records, but through the timeless understanding that winter is both beautiful and unforgiving, a season that reveals the vulnerability of the body and the resilience of the spirit. The deepest winter nights in the medieval world were unlike any other hours of the year. They were heavy, vast, and strangely alive with a quiet that made every tiny sound feel important. Fires dimmed into glowing embers. Winds brushed softly against wooden shutters. And beneath that dark stillness, people listened closely for the signs of sickness that often grew stronger after sundown. Many believed winter illnesses changed character at night. Coughs deepened, fevers sharpened, breathing grew more unsettling. And so families kept watch, waiting through the long hours when sickness felt closest, almost as if the darkness itself fed upon weakness. Those who stayed awake were known as the night watchers, not by profession, not by duty, but by love and necessity. They sat at the bedsides of the sick, wrapped in furs, holding lanterns whose warm light swayed gently across the room. They listened to every breath. They felt every shift in temperature. They whispered small reassurances when fear stirred in the shadows. Winter was quiet outside, but inside these rooms, the battle against illness continued without pause. Some diseases grew more mysterious after sunset, as if hiding their true form. A person might seem stable during the day. Then with the fall of night, their breath would become shallow. Their chest would tighten. Their mind would wander. The watchers noticed these changes long before healers did. They were the ones who saw how winter sickness could transform in the darkness. They felt how time moved differently in the soft glow of lantern, lights low, heavy, and full of unspoken worries. A strange fear surrounded the winter nights. People believed unseen forces roamed freely when the sun disappeared. They spoke of spirits that carried illness in their whispering trails. They imagined cold shadows slipping through the cracks of old wooden homes. They feared that winter itself watched them, choosing who would weaken next. Though these beliefs were shaped by superstition, they reflected something real, a fear of silent contagion. Illnesses spread without warning. A small cough in one home became a lingering sickness in another. A fevered child in the morning became a weak father by nightfall. Villagers tried to understand these patterns, but winter diseases were unpredictable. They traveled through families like invisible travelers, moving from breath to breath. People did not yet understand germs. They only understood closeness. They only understood that sickness moved through touch, through shared air, through nights spent huddled together for warmth. And so each home developed its own quiet rituals to keep illness away. Some placed sprigs of dried herbs above doorways. Some burned juniper branches before sleep. Some whispered protective chants as candles flickered beside beds. These small acts did not always prevent disease, but they brought comfort. And comfort, in winter, mattered as much as medicine. The night watchers often sat for hours without speaking. They observed. They waited. They breathed slowly to keep themselves calm. Even the sound of their own breathing felt important, as if it helped anchor the sick person's breath to life. Outside, wolves sometimes howled in the distance. The wind pressed against thin walls. Snow tapped softly at windows, like delicate fingers. All of these sounds blended into the rhythm of the night, a rhythm the watchers learned to read like a quiet language. Sometimes they dozed lightly, only to wake with a sudden jolt when a cough sounded too sharp. Sometimes they leaned forward, checking if the chest still rose and fell. And sometimes they simply rested their heads near the sick, letting their warmth serve as a silent shield against the cold. The fear of silent contagion intensified in houses where sickness had already taken one life. People believed illness lingered like a presence. They thought it stayed in the air. They imagined it clung to blankets, to clothes, to sorrow itself. These beliefs were often untrue, but grief reshaped reality. A family that had lost someone to a winter illness moved carefully through their home, as if afraid to disturb something unseen. They opened windows briefly to let cold, fresh air sweep out the old. They boiled water with herbs to cleanse the space. They sat closer together, speaking softly, as though the illness might wake if they raised their voices. The night watchers in such homes carried a heavier weight. They had witnessed loss. They feared its return. Yet they stayed by the bedsides of the sick with remarkable quiet courage. Their presence was a kind of strength, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, compassion could still shine like a dim lantern flame. Occasionally, in the middle of the night, a sick person would reach out blindly. Their fingers would tremble. Their eyes would search for something familiar, and the watcher would gently take their hand, grounding them in warmth. Those moments carried deep emotion, a silent exchange between fear and comfort, between fragility and endurance, between life and the possibility of loss. But not all winter nights were filled with dread. There were nights when the sick slept peacefully, breathing steadily, while the watchers finally allowed themselves to relax. They gazed at the fire glowing softly. They warmed their hands over small flames. They wrapped blankets tighter around their shoulders. And in those calmer hours, they found brief moments of peace, moments that reminded them why they kept watch in the first place. Healers often visited after dawn. They arrived with herbal mixtures, warm cloths, and gentle words. But they always asked the watchers what the night had revealed. Had the fever risen? Had the cough deepened? Had the breath become strained? For the watchers were the ones who saw illness unfold hour by hour. Their observations shaped the healers' choices. Their vigilance truly mattered. In the harshest winters, the watchers rarely left their posts. They slept in shifts. They ate beside the sick. They sacrificed their own comfort. They endured long, cold hours without complaint, not because they feared death more than others, but because their hearts were anchored to the hope that someone they loved might recover. Night after night, they repeated the same quiet routine. Warm the broth, adjust the blankets, check the breath, watch the fire, listen to the wind, and pray that morning would bring improvement instead of sorrow. Silent contagion also moved between homes through gatherings that were meant to bring comfort. People visited neighbors to offer help. They exchanged food when supplies ran low. They sat with the grieving to offer support. But every act of kindness risked spreading unseen illness. Winter made human connection both necessary and dangerous. Still, people refused to isolate completely. They believed despair was just as harmful as disease. And so life continued with caution. Soft voices, short visits, shared warmth exchanged carefully. Healers warned families to let in fresh air, even if it chilled the home. They insisted that windows be opened at least briefly at sunrise. They believed clean air could break the spell of illness. In truth, they were not entirely wrong. Ventilation helped more than they realized. A small gesture that offered protection long before science explained its value. Night watchers always performed this simple task at dawn, breathing in the sharp morning air as if cleansing themselves from the long, tense hours of darkness. Despite the quiet terror surrounding winter diseases, there was also resilience in every village. Children recovered unexpectedly. Elders found new strength. Bodies weakened by cold fought back with surprising endurance. The watchers witnessed these small miracles firsthand. They saw fevers break. They saw color return to pale cheeks. They saw shaking hands grow steady. And in those moments, their hearts filled with relief that melted the fear of many nights. Not every winter story ended in healing, but every story, even the sorrowful ones, revealed the depth of human attachment. Love kept the watchers awake. Hope kept their lanterns burning. Compassion kept them steady when their own strength wavered. Outside, the winter world remained vast and indifferent. Snow continued to fall. Winds continued to whisper. Nights continued to stretch long. But inside the small glow of each home, bravery unfolded quietly in the form of someone who simply refused to leave the bedside of the sick. Their presence softened fear. Their vigilance slowed the spread of despair. Their warmth fought the cold that threatened to settle into the bones of the vulnerable. The forgotten winter diseases of the medieval world were mysterious and often unstoppable. But the night watchers were the silent guardians who faced those dangers every night. Their stories were rarely told. Their names were rarely remembered. Yet their unwavering watch brought countless people rough the darkest hours of the coldest season. And in the dim light of early morning, when the first glow of dawn touched the frost-covered earth, their quiet endurance became a testament to the strength of the human spirit, a strength that endured even when winter pressed hardest against the heart. The medieval winter nights held a peculiar stillness that made every sound echo deeper. Even the crackle of a fireplace felt louder, sharper, as if the cold sharpened the edges of noise. People moved quietly through their homes, respecting the darkness as though it had its own rules. And within those long silent hours, strange symptoms appeared, symptoms that made winter illnesses feel almost alive. Some villagers whispered that winter shadows walked among them. They spoke softly of illnesses that woke only after the sun disappeared. And though their beliefs were shaped by fear, the symptoms they described were real, unsettling, and deeply mysterious. The first of these night symptoms was a sudden heaviness in the chest. Not pain, not sharp discomfort, just an oppressive weight that appeared only at night. People lay still under their blankets, feeling the pressure settle like a cold stone against the ribs. Breathing became slow and effortful. The chest rose reluctantly, as if weighted down by the darkness. And when sufferers spoke of it in the morning, they said it felt like something unseen had sat upon them. The watchers sitting nearby saw the signs before the sick person even woke. They noticed the tightening breath, the shifting of the body, the faint lines of discomfort forming across the face. The second strange winter symptom was known in whispers as the night tremor. It began as a subtle shiver, just a small tremble in the hands or feet. But as the night deepened, the tremor grew stronger, turning into shaking that no amount of blankets could control. Healers believed the cold had reached too deeply into the body. They warmed stones at the fire. They placed them under blankets near the spine. They brewed hot drinks in the small hours, hoping warmth would chase away the invisible chill. Some patients responded. Their shaking slowed. Their breathing steadied. But others trembled until dawn, exhausted by the relentless night. Another winter night symptom frightened villagers even more: sudden confusion that arrived without warning. A person could be alert during the day, speaking normally, moving with purpose. But once darkness settled, their mind wandered into strange, dreamlike spaces. They asked odd questions. They forgot familiar faces. They mistook shadows for people and whispered to empty corners. The watchers had to guide them gently back into reality. They spoke softly, repeating names. They held their hands to ground them. Sometimes it worked. Sometimes it didn't. And in the flickering candlelight, the scene felt eerie, like two worlds brushing against each other. The night confusion often came with fevers. Heat radiated from the skin. Sweat dampened blankets. And yet the person shivered violently, caught between fire and ice. Families feared this state more than any other. They believed the soul was drifting away. They prayed quietly, asking it to stay tethered to the body until morning. And in those long hours, even the bravest hearts trembled. There was another symptom, a quiet one, that frightened watchers in its subtlety. It was the fading of breath. Not a sudden struggle, not a loud gasp, just breaths growing softer, more fragile, like a candle flame shrinking. The watchers leaned in close. They listened with their ears near the sick person's mouth. They held their own breath to hear better. Sometimes the quiet breath steadied. Sometimes it slipped away unnoticed until a gentle stillness settled over the room. These were the moments that taught watchers how delicate life was during the medieval winter. A single night could decide the fate of a family. And while symptoms varied, the patterns always pointed back to the same truth. Winter illnesses were strongest when the world slept. Another strange night symptom involved the skin itself. People developed frost-like patches even when indoors. Pale spots, bluish tinges. Cold areas on the arms or legs that refused to warm. Villagers believed winter spirits touched the skin directly. They spoke of invisible fingers pressing into flesh. But the truth, though unknown at the time, was likely poor circulation mixed with severe cold. Those who suffered these patches sometimes felt intense itching, sometimes numbness, sometimes stabbing pain that traveled slowly along the limbs. Healers massaged the cold spots with warm oils. They wrapped limbs tightly in cloth. They whispered calming chants while warming the frostbitten areas with their own hands. Their efforts brought relief to many, though not all. Then there were the night sweats, intense and sudden. People woke drenched, as though they had walked through rain. Their hair was soaked. Their clothes clung uncomfortably to their skin. The watchers replaced the wet blankets. They helped the sick change garments. They provided warm broth to steady the trembling that followed. These sweats were often a turning point. Either the fever broke afterward, or the illness deepened. Winter nights held no predictable patterns. Each symptom could be a sign of recovery or a warning of decline. Families never knew which direction the night would take, and that uncertainty weighed heavily on their hearts. There was a strange auditory symptom, too, something people heard only at night. It wasn't coughing or groaning. It wasn't muttering or calling out. It was the sound of breath catching, briefly stopping, and returning with a small gasp. The watchers stayed alert for this. Every pause sent fear rippling through them. Every gasp brought fragile relief. These moments taught them how close life sat to the edge during winter sickness. Some described the nights as a kind of test, not of strength, not of courage, but of patience and presence. Sitting beside someone who struggled through these symptoms required deep calm. Watchers often felt tired. Their backs ached. Their eyes burned with exhaustion. Yet they stayed awake, guided by love, duty, or simply the knowledge that a person should not suffer alone. One of the most disturbing night symptoms was the sudden drop in body warmth. A person could be warm at sunset, but by midnight, their skin felt cold and clammy. Their breath weakened. Their heartbeat grew faint. Families panicked when this happened. They piled blankets. They placed warm stones around the body. They prayed the warmth would return. Sometimes it did. Sometimes it never came back. This symptom became associated with the idea of winter shadows figures. People imagined standing beside the sick, pulling warmth away. Stories spread of shadowy outlines seen near beds, of flickers of movement in corners, of chills that moved like living things through the room. Fear gave shape to these illusions, but the symptoms behind them were painfully real, and they revealed how many winter illnesses caused sudden changes in circulation, temperature, and vitality. Another frightening symptom was the silent choking that happened in the middle of the night, a moment of blocked breath, a sudden tightening of the throat, a desperate gasp that woke the entire household. Healers believed thick winter air settled in the lungs. They brewed warm mixtures of honey and herbs to ease the tension. They placed steaming bowls beneath blankets to let the sick breathe in heated vapors. These simple remedies were sometimes enough to prevent the night's terror from returning. And then there were the noises the sick made while drifting into half-sleep. Soft murmurs, unclear words, crying that wasn't quite conscious. The watchers listened with heavy hearts. They knew these sounds came from discomfort, fear, or hallucinations. And yet, they couldn't ignore them. Every sound hinted at the inner struggle happening beneath the fever. Night after night, watchers braced themselves for these symptoms. Some nights passed quietly. Others were filled with trembling hands and rapid heartbeats. And through all of it, winter remained oppressive outside, unmoving, indifferent, cold. Sometimes snowfall intensified during the worst symptoms, almost as if the world outside reflected the turmoil within. Watchers often opened small cracks in the shutter to check the night sky. They found peace in the gentle drift of falling snow. They breathed slowly, grounding themselves while listening to the fragile breaths behind them. Healers trained watchers to look for certain small signs of hope: a steadier breath, a calmer expression, a warmer hand. These tiny changes often meant the sickness was turning. And though nights were long, these clues carried enough hope to keep the watchers awake and steady. There were also nights when the sick asked strange questions. They spoke softly of walking through forests, of seeing old memories, of hearing voices calling them home. The watchers soothed them, reminding them gently they were safe. But inside, fear stirred. Such visions were often the mind's response to fever and weakness. Yet in the medieval world, they carried spiritual meaning too. Families believed these visions meant the boundary between life and death had thinned. They feared the sick person might follow those visions into silence if left unattended. So they held hands tighter. They whispered comforting words more often. They stayed awake even when their own eyes begged for sleep. Some night symptoms were not physical, but emotional. Fear, panic, a sudden sense of doom. People woke with wide eyes, breathing hard, feeling as if something terrible hovered just out of sight. Watchers calmed them. They stroked their hair. They encouraged slow breathing. These episodes were common during winter illnesses, brought on by fever, weakness, and the oppressive darkness. Comfort helped more than any herb. The presence of another human softened the fear that gripped the heart. Night after night, watchers learned how powerful simple companionship could be. It brought warmth deeper than blankets. It brought peace stronger than medicine. And in the long, quiet hours before dawn, it kept despair from settling into the room. Winter shadows may not have been real, but the symptoms they inspired were strange trembling, sudden confusion, breathing that faltered, warmth that vanished, visions that drifted through fevered minds. These symptoms shaped the medieval understanding of winter illnesses. They taught families to expect the unexpected. They taught watchers to remain patient, observant, and calm. And they taught entire villages how fragile life could be under the weight of winter. But they also revealed something stronger, something the cold could never freeze. The steady courage of those who kept watch, the gentle compassion that filled small rooms, the enduring hope that refused to disappear, even on the darkest nights. And when dawn finally touched the frost-covered world, its first light always carried a faint whisper of relief, a whisper that promised the night was over. For now, in the heart of winter, when frost painted the windows white, villagers relied on remedies that had been passed down quietly for generations. These cures were born of observation, intuition, and patient experimentation, often discovered through trial and error over long, cold years. Herbs were central to medieval winter medicine. Elderberry, gathered in late summer and carefully dried, was treasured for its ability to soothe fevers. Villagers boiled the dark berries into warm, tart syrups, sweetening them with honey to make them palatable for children and adults alike. They believed that the warmth of the drink combined with the berry essence could help chase away the lingering chills of a deep winter cold. Thyme was another prized herb, often collected from rocky, exposed hillsides where it survived the harshest sun and frost. Its small, resilient leaves held a pungent aroma that villagers infused into teas or broths. They believed thyme strengthened the lungs, eased coughing, and prepared the body to resist the sudden onslaught of cold winds. Willow bark, bitter and astringent, was reserved for those suffering from pain and fevers. A small piece of bark steeped in hot water produced a tonic that eased aches, calmed fevers, and brought a gentle sense of relief. The villagers did not always understand why these remedies worked, but centuries of observation taught them their value. Each plant, each root, each dried flower was a soldier in the ongoing winter battle against illness. Beyond herbs, simple household remedies became lifelines. Warm broths made from root vegetables, barley, and small pieces of salted meat offered both nourishment and heat. They were easy to digest and provided the body with energy to resist lingering chills. People drank these broths slowly, savoring the warmth they carried. Garlic was another essential ingredient in medieval winter medicine. Its strong aroma was said to ward off illness, while its bitter taste strengthened the blood and lungs. Cloves, cinnamon, and ginger were rare and expensive, but when available, they were added to teas and porridges, bringing not only flavor, but also perceived protective qualities. Honey, with its sweetness and soothing texture, served as more than just a taste. It was applied to coughs, fevers, and even small wounds. Mixed with herbal powders, it became a thick paste that warmed and comforted the body from the inside out. Steam and warmth were equally important as the substances themselves. Villagers placed steaming bowls near bedsides, allowing the fragrant vapors to fill the room. They believed the heated air carried healing properties, settling deep into lungs and easing congested chests. Warm stones, heated slowly by the hearth, were often wrapped in cloth and tucked beneath blankets. Their gentle heat was thought to comfort aching limbs and improve circulation during the bitterest nights. Candlelight, though faint, was also considered healing. The soft glow offered a psychological comfort that strengthened the spirit, reminding the sick they were not alone in the cold. Apart from physical remedies, certain rituals provided a sense of control over illness. Fumigating rooms with juniper or rosemary smoke was common. People believed the smoke purified the air, sweeping away invisible forces that brought disease. Small prayers or chants were murmured quietly during these rituals. Even when the words themselves held no magical power, the act of performing them provided solace and hope. Midwives and wise women often combined practical medicine with these rituals. They taught families to observe their environment, noticing which winds carried chills, which snowfalls preceded fevers, and which foods strengthened their bodies against the cold. Their knowledge was practical, precise, and deeply connected to the rhythms of nature. Each observation became a tool to predict and prevent illness during long winters. Interestingly, some remedies were preserved through the coldest months by creative storage techniques. Roots and herbs were buried under snow, in clay jars, or in straw-lined boxes to prevent decay. This slow preservation allowed them to retain potency through harsh months when fresh resources were scarce. Fermented foods also played a subtle role in sustaining winter health. Pickled vegetables, cheeses, and fermented grains offered nutrients that strengthened the body's defenses. Though the concept of germs was unknown, villagers recognized patterns. They knew certain foods and practices seemed to ward off sickness, even if the reason remained a mystery. Honey, fermented beverages, and herbal teas were shared with neighbors in small quantities, fostering community resilience against disease. Isolation was sometimes necessary, but communal care was just as vital. Families cared for one another, knowing that attention, warmth, and nourishment could make the difference between survival and decline. Simple physical care was intertwined with emotional support. A warm hand held on a forehead, a gentle voice murmuring reassurance. The body and mind were treated together, reflecting an intuitive understanding of holistic healing. In some regions, snow itself became part of the cure. Villagers believed that brief contact with clean, powdered snow could cool fevers and restore energy. The ritual involved pressing small amounts of snow to the skin or inhaling the crisp, cold air for a few minutes. It was always controlled carefully, avoiding excessive exposure that could worsen the chill. Wood ashes, gathered from hearths, were occasionally used externally. Applied with a small cloth, they were believed to draw out lingering cold from the skin and muscles. Even the design of the home played a role. Low doorways encouraged slow movement. Thick walls kept drafts at bay. Sleeping arrangements were designed to maximize warmth. Families clustered together, sharing heat, while layers of blankets and furs insulated against the icy night. These combined strategies, herbs, warm foods, heat, smoke, careful observation, and rituals formed an intricate web of protection against winter diseases. Even if they could not cure all illnesses, they eased suffering and offered hope. Traveling healers brought additional knowledge. Monks carrying dried herbs, apprentices learning from wise women, and apothecaries visiting remote villages all contributed to a shared understanding of winter medicine. They exchanged tips, which herbs to combine, how to store roots, how to prepare broths, and when to rest versus when to apply warmth. Even the simplest observations mattered. Noticing that a particular cough eased near a sunny window, recognizing that a fever dropped after a bowl of hot elderberry tea, seeing that children slept better after a gentle lullaby beside the hearth. These details accumulated into a quiet, collective wisdom, a knowledge that allowed communities to survive winters that were otherwise merciless. Children were taught early about these remedies. They watched elders crush herbs, stir broths, and apply poultices. Even small tasks, like grinding garlic or picking thyme, became lessons in observation and care. Through repeated practice, The young learned to recognize symptoms and apply simple remedies before illnesses worsened. The wisdom of the medieval winter was as much about prevention as cure. Diet, warmth, observation, emotional care, and cautious communal practices created a network of defense that went beyond what any single remedy could achieve. When illnesses struck, the combination of herbs, warmth, careful attention, and gentle companionship often made the difference between recovery and decline. And though many remedies were imperfect or only partially effective, they offered comfort. They reassured the sick and strengthened the caregivers. Ultimately, medieval winter medicine was a blend of tangible practice and intangible care. It reflected a deep understanding that illness touched not only the body, but the heart and spirit. In every steaming cup, in every carefully wrapped bundle of herbs, and in every watchful eye beside a fevered patient, there was hope. And in that hope, the harshest winters could be endured. The legacy of these practices remains quietly in the stories of survival, in the wisdom that was never fully written down, but lived through action, patience, and love. Winter in the medieval world was not only a battle of bodies against the cold. It was a battle of minds against fear, isolation, and uncertainty. Villagers experienced long nights filled with silence that seemed alive. The faintest creak of a floorboard, the whisper of wind through cracks, or the distant howl of a wolf carried weight in the imagination. Fear of illness intertwined with fear of the dark. Every cough, shiver, or sudden movement reminded them of the unseen dangers lingering in the frozen air. Isolation amplified these fears. Villages were spread out, snow often blocking paths, making travel nearly impossible. Neighbors could not visit freely. Supplies were scarce. And if sickness appeared, families faced the prospect of caring for the ill alone. Children huddled near parents, seeking warmth. Elders stayed quiet, hiding worries to avoid increasing panic. Yet, despite the isolation, resilience emerged. Human beings adapted to long nights and cold days by finding small rituals that offered comfort. Simple routines brought structure and calm. Lighting candles at a particular hour, serving warm tea at a consistent time, wrapping oneself in layered blankets with the same method each night. These rituals offered a sense of control in an otherwise uncontrollable environment. They reassured the mind that, though winter was harsh, some things remained predictable. Storytelling became a vital tool. By the fire, parents told children tales of survival, clever ancestors, and the small victories of previous winters. These stories carried lessons about perseverance, hope, and clever use of resources. They also distracted the mind from the ever-present chill outside. Singing softly together was another way to soothe anxiety. The human voice, warm and rhythmic, brought calm to the most restless hearts. Children's laughter, even faint, worked as medicine for weary minds. Fear of invisible diseases created tension within homes. People were cautious about touching each other. Families separated blankets or utensils, wary of invisible contagion. Yet emotional care remained essential, creating a delicate balance between protection and love. Sleep became both a refuge and a challenge. The mind remained alert, listening for the slightest sound. Even as the body needed rest, the imagination ran wild with possible threats. Dreams were vivid, often filled with cold landscapes, distant snowstorms, and shadowy figures. Morning brought relief when the sun rose and warmth returned, even briefly. Communities developed shared practices to address fear and isolation. Neighbors left small gifts or notes, signaling attention without direct contact. Village elders reminded everyone of herbs, routines, and watchful care. They offered guidance that strengthened communal resilience. Religious faith also played a crucial role. Prayers whispered to saints or spirits provided comfort. They reminded villagers that some forces were beyond human control, but hope and patience remained. Rituals, blessings, and offerings became part of daily routines, bringing structure to long, uncertain days. Meditation and quiet reflection were sometimes practiced beside fires or frozen streams. The act of slowing breathing, observing one's thoughts, and grounding oneself offered psychological relief. Even the harshness of winter became a teacher, showing patience and resilience. The long nights sharpened observation and intuition. The mind learned to recognize signs of illness, subtle changes in temperature, and the rhythm of the household. These skills helped prevent crises before they escalated. Families discovered that care was not only physical. Listening attentively, speaking gently, and remaining present offered protection beyond any herb or poultice. Compassion became a shield against despair. The emotional warmth they generated was as vital as fire and blankets. One particularly challenging aspect of winter was the prolonged lack of sunlight. Daylight hours shrank dramatically, leaving people in dim light for most of the day. This lack of sun affected mood and energy. Fatigue, lethargy, and melancholy became common, especially among the weak or ill. Villagers discovered that exposure to any available light, even a small candle, improved spirits. Gathering near windows during brief sunny moments became a subtle form of therapy. Long hours alone also magnified anxiety. People imagined threats, diseases creeping closer, wolves approaching, or shadows moving unnaturally. The mind, in isolation, often amplified danger, but communal awareness, even at a distance, provided reassurance. Neighbors checking in, shared knowledge of remedies, or simply knowing that others endured the same conditions created psychological protection. Resilience grew not only from survival, but also from creativity. Children made small games in the snow. Adults improvised ways to stretch warmth, preserve food, or soothe the sick. Problem solving became essential for both survival and mental stability. These small acts nurtured hope and confidence, which were critical in long, relentless winters. Sleep, though interrupted by worry or illness, was also maintained by rituals. A cup of warm tea, a whispered prayer, a soft lullaby. These small actions soothed nerves and allowed rest to come more naturally. Even during illness, small victories mattered. A slight drop in fever, a hand that warmed after numbness. Each positive change, however minor, reassured the mind and reinforced resilience. The winter taught people to measure success in these small increments rather than expecting dramatic recoveries. Observation and patience were skills honed through repeated winters. Villagers learned subtle signs of worsening illness, changes in skin color, shifts in breathing, or unusual behavior. They also noticed signs of recovery: steadier breath, warmer hands, brighter eyes. This awareness reduced panic and guided appropriate care. During particularly harsh winters, some communities organized small groups to watch over the sick. Rotating responsibilities allowed caregivers brief moments of rest while ensuring constant attention. These rotations created shared responsibility, reduced burnout, and reinforced social cohesion. Trust and collaboration became as essential as any physical remedy. Stories of survival reinforced resilience. Tales of past winters, clever strategies, and unexpected recoveries reminded people that suffering, though inevitable, was temporary. Hope became a quiet but potent form of medicine. It kept hearts strong, even when bodies were weak. In addition to hope, faith, and community, humor occasionally broke through the cold. A shared joke, a playful tease. Laughter, even brief, lifted spirits and eased tension. It reminded villagers that despite harsh winters, life continued. Music and song, whether religious or playful, became tools to soothe mental strain. The resonance of voices in cold, quiet rooms offered comfort that no warmth or medicine could replicate. It connected hearts, bridged distance, and strengthened endurance. Ultimately, medieval winter was not conquered by fire or herb alone. It was endured through a delicate combination of physical care, emotional vigilance, communal collaboration, and hope. Survival depended as much on maintaining mental strength as on treating symptoms. Those who thrived learned to balance fear and action, care and rest, observation and intuition. Even the coldest nights taught lessons of resilience, patience, and the quiet power of human connection. And while winters remained harsh, these strategies ensured that communities survived, minds remained alert, and spirits endured. As winter slowly stretched its long fingers across the medieval world, villagers learned to move in rhythm with the cold. Each day, each night, they adjusted to the harshness, finding subtle ways to preserve life and warmth. Snow piled against wooden walls. Rivers froze over, creating silent mirrors of the gray sky. The cold was relentless. It penetrated every crevice, every stone, and every layer of clothing. Yet even in this unforgiving landscape, life persisted. Families moved together in small, deliberate patterns. Children followed adults carefully. Every step across frozen paths was measured. Every motion saved energy and heat. Meals were prepared slowly. A handful of roots, a bit of salted meat, a bowl of hot broth became rituals of survival. The preparation, the cooking, and the sharing created warmth that went beyond fire. Blankets and furs were layered thickly. Heaters, small hearths, and candles became both light and protection. Every flickering flame held a silent promise: comfort against the cold, reassurance against despair. Illness remained a constant threat. Breath could falter, fevers could rise, and the body's defenses could weaken in a single night. Yet villagers had learned patience and vigilance. Watchers remained awake. They held hands, adjusted blankets, and whispered comfort. Their presence alone acted as medicine. They were guardians of both life and hope. Herbal remedies continued to serve as quiet allies. Elderberry, thyme, willow, and garlic remained central. Broths, teas, and poultices were applied with careful repetition. Each act reinforced the rhythm of survival. Families measured time not only by sun and moon, but by the subtle signs of winter as end. Daylight slowly increased, though faintly, giving hope in small increments. Birds returned, their faint songs piercing the frozen quiet. Snow softened, revealing the shapes beneath. Evenings were still long, shadows stretched far, and night symptoms of illness continued to demand attention. But people noticed small victories: steadier breathing, warmer hands, brighter eyes. Each improvement was celebrated quietly. Every small recovery reminded watchers that endurance mattered. Hope became a tangible presence in households. It spread silently, moving from one family to another, a chain of resilience linking the village together. As spring approached, ice began to crack and melt. Rivers flowed again, their cold waters carrying life back into the land. Snowdrops and early flowers emerged, timid but persistent, marking the promise of renewal. Families observed these changes with gratitude. They had endured, survived, and nurtured life through months of darkness, cold, and fear. Their bodies were stronger. Their knowledge of winter's dangers was deepened. Their spirits were sharpened by trial. The final lessons of winter were subtle but profound. Patience mattered. Attention mattered. Presence mattered more than any magic or medicine. Even the harshest season could be endured with calm, care, and gentle perseverance. Communities emerged resilient. They had faced isolation, sickness, and the oppressive quiet of winter nights. They had used warmth, food, herbs, rituals, observation, and emotional care to sustain themselves. They had survived the unseen threats that lingered in shadows and the fleeting terrors of night symptoms. Through it all, compassion remained the strongest remedy. A hand held, a whispered word, a watchful eye, these quiet gestures carried more weight than any poultice or herb. The promise of spring was more than a change in season. It was a reward for endurance, a gentle reminder that time moves forward, even when the cold seems eternal. Snow melted slowly, water trickled through frozen streams, and early warmth returned to the skin. Villagers stepped outside carefully, feeling the sun on their faces, savoring small joys, the scent of thawing earth, the murmur of flowing water, the chirping of returning birds. Life, once tense and constrained by frost, unfolded gradually. People ventured further, cleared snowed-in paths, and prepared fields for the planting season. Even those who had been ill recovered slowly, their strength returning with every day of sunlight and warmth. Hope became visible, tangible, and shared. It reinforced a quiet truth. Winters may be harsh, diseases may be mysterious, but endurance and care prevail. Elders spoke of past winters and their hardships. They reminded the young to remember both the suffering and the methods of survival. Stories of herbal remedies, vigilant watchers, patient families, and quiet rituals became lessons for the future. They shaped wisdom that would last generations. The long winter nights, once filled with fear, now became memories of resilience. The darkness no longer seemed oppressive because it had been endured with calm determination. The cold no longer seemed cruel because warmth had been shared despite it. The unseen illnesses, though frightening, had taught vigilance, care, and compassion. And the villagers had survived. Spring did not erase the hardships of winter. It did, however, reward those who had watched carefully, cared attentively, and endured patiently. The first flowers, the thawing streams, the returning warmth, all were silent celebrations of survival. Children ran through the slowly melting snow, their laughter echoing through villages that had learned to persevere. Families embraced, sharing warmth that no frost could diminish. And the lessons of the frozen months became part of the collective memory. Preparation mattered. Compassion mattered. Hope mattered most. The medieval winter, with all its frost, illness, and long nights, faded into memory. But the quiet endurance, the gentle vigilance, and the care that had carried people through the harshest months remained. The land awakened slowly, and the people, stronger and wiser, moved forward with renewed strength. The promise of spring whispered that life persists. The promise of spring reminded all that even the coldest, darkest winters come to an end. And with every thaw, every returning bird, every sunbeam breaking through frost-laden skies, the memory of endurance remained alive, silent, calming, and reassuring, like a soft lullaby for the heart.